And we're going to get started first with Dr. Ken Lipton from right here at Eisenhower.
Thanks. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is the role of inflammation. You saw a little bit of that earlier in the presentation that we just left, where they said that some of the stakeholders were concerned about inflammation and aging. It turns out inflammation is a major problem and has been a major problem, as you know, in HIV as well. I want to show you all the way back in HIV and how it's kind of evolved as we've gone forward, recognizing that inflammation is actually mediates most of the diseases of aging. So to start off, this was simply from the Fram study, which said that very briefly, the higher the degree of inflammation, the higher the mortality rate, and this is in HIV-infected folks. But more specifically, I wanted to show you something because I may kind of violate a few of the myths that are out there with this. But this was a study that we did in the HIV outpatient study, the CDC-sponsored study, we'll look at peripheral neuropathy with D4T, okay, we'll look at anemia with AZT and renal failure with tenofovir. And what I'm going to show you is on this slide, if you can see here, the lower the T cell count, the higher the risk of getting peripheral neuropathy. This is with D4T. Also, what's interesting is the longer somebody was on the drug, the less likely they were to develop peripheral neuropathy. So if they didn't develop it initially, the risk of developing it went down. So we could say, well, that's a fluke, except we saw the exact same relationship with AZT and anemia. We saw the exact same relationship with tenofovir and renal failure. And so the issue came up, it didn't make any sense. We all assumed that these were cumulative toxicities. The fact of the matter is they weren't. Here's the reason why. An explanation. Pete Anderson and Courtney Fletcher, both pharmacokineticists for the ACTG, showed very clearly that the higher the degree of inflammation, the greater the phosphorylation of the drugs. It's the phosphorylation of the drug that makes it active. These were intracellular levels. So people with the lowest T cell counts, the highest rate of inflammation, had higher levels of drugs. So they had toxic levels of the drugs in their cells. As their disease improved, those levels came down. And so again, if they didn't develop the toxicity at the beginning, they weren't going to develop it down the road. Same thing we could see with lipodystrophy. It was associated, again, with lower T cell counts. We saw a lot more lipodystrophy in the bad days of HIV than we do now when we're treating people earlier. That's not to say that the drugs don't have toxicities. All drugs have toxicities, but this was mediated by inflammation. I should point out that lipodystrophy is probably a slow-motion immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome. So, cardiovascular disease, a disease associated with aging. Once again, we know that people have a higher rate of myocardial infarctions or heart attacks if they're HIV infected compared to the people of the same age in the general population. This has been shown over and over again. And what we showed again in the hops was that, once again, the CD4 count, the lower CD4 count, that says less than 500. In fact, most of that was less than 350 T cells, was a risk factor consistent with all the other risk factors associated with cardiovascular disease. What was interesting is we looked at all the drugs too, because of, we blame the drugs, there was no signal. We couldn't find an association.
Not even protease.
Not even protease inhibitors. When we looked at abacavir and tenofovir, everything, we couldn't find anything. So, what I'm going to tell you very briefly is here's what we're doing with relationship to inflammation and how we're going to address it at Eisenhower. One, we're part of the REPRIEVE study. This is a study looking at cardiovascular events. What they're doing is they want to take those individuals who normally, based on current guidelines, would not go on a statin because their 10-year cardiovascular risk is too low for that. And what they do is they randomize those people into going on a statin or not going on a statin, which is the standard of care. And the idea is to find out what 10-year cardiovascular risk we should be considering for HIV care. Secondly, and I emphasized on this slide in red, one of the secondary outcomes is statin therapy will reduce serious non-cardiovascular events, including malignancies, end-stage kidney or liver disease, mainly because statins are anti-inflammatory. So that's, they lower LDL, but they're also anti-inflammatory. So that's one study that we're doing. It is still actually enrolling, so it's a long 6-year study, and it's sponsored by the NIH. The other study that I'm pointing out, although it is on hold as far as enrollment right now because they're waiting for non-US sites to catch up in the quota, but this is the Atlas 2M study, cabotegravir and rilpivirine. Okay, cabotegravir, second generation integrase inhibitor, rilpivirine, which is one of the non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors that we have already, but both of these are injected intramuscularly. It'll either be either once a month or once every other month. No oral therapy, just injections. Earlier studies with this combination look pretty good, look actually real good, but this is the study. The thing that I want to point out with this is as follows, and let me kind of explain what we want to do. This is not part of the 2M study, but this is a study that we want to do with injectable rather than oral medications. It turns out that antiretroviral therapy disrupts the microbiome, or the normal bacteria in the gut. When that happens, the lining of the gut gets disrupted, products of bacteria go through the wall of the intestine. So here's the opening, the inside of the intestine that goes to the wall. Outside of the wall of the intestine is this huge group of lymph nodes and inflammatory cells. This is called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So what happens is that, again, we'll blow it up so you can see it. What goes on with this is that already HIV is starting to go after the T cells, and what you see are dendritic cells, which are also part of the HIV inflammatory cascade. So you're already getting activated inflammation going on. With the breakdown of the integrity of the wall, you get lipopolysaccharide and other products of bacteria entering this area, again increasing more inflammation, causing more inflammation. This then disrupts the lymphoid architecture and increases the inflammation that much more. So what we want to do in a study that we're proposing, because we have somebody who is doing microbiome research right now, is to look at the microbiome in people on this regimen versus oral and find out if there actually is an advantage for intramuscular injections as opposed to oral medication. So with that in mind, I leave it there just to let you know where we're going at Eisenhower. Next.
You're all speak and there'll be questions at the end.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Okay, sure. All right, so my name is Michael Plankey. I am a researcher at Georgetown University. I've been at Georgetown for about 12 years. I've done work in HIV for about 26 years. Ron Stahl and I kind of met while I knew about his work before I came to Georgetown. And as an investigator, senior investigator for the multi-center AIDS cohort study, which is the largest and longest study of both HIV positive and HIV negative men in the world. There are 4 centers: Baltimore, DC, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and LA. and we follow about 2,400 men. 50% are positive, 50% are negative, and we've been doing this for about, well, we're starting our 35th year. I'm also a senior investigator for the women's study, the Women's Interagency HIV study, which is a study of ethnic minority women who are infected or affected with HIV, and there are 9 sites in the US. And we follow again about 2,700 women. 75% are positive and 25% are negative. So in 2000, so my first introduction to the MACs was to look at the relationship between methamphetamine use and seroconversion, because I was, in the late 90s, early 2000, there was lots of things going on with, Peter Staley, use meth kit, HIV, those posters at bus stations in New York City. And I was at the time working at the National Cancer Institute. And so I thought, and I had been working with some MACs data at the time, that there have to be some data related to methamphetamine use and seroconversion in the MACs. And so I actually wrote to the MACs and said, I want to study this. And after a while, I was able to get the data, and it was actually my first paper that I published when I was at Georgetown. I can remember, I'll just give you a little anecdote. I was sitting there getting ready to submit this paper, and Georgetown's a Jesuit university. It doesn't have a very bright history with gay and lesbian women, and certainly not about anal sex and drugs. So I'm writing my first. So I'm writing. I'll never forget this. I can see this to this day. I'm putting the affiliation of Georgetown University on my first paper that I wrote from the MACs of butt sex and drugs. And I thought to myself, holy shit. What's going to happen here now? And so, it got published. It gets cited well because it actually is the largest study that looks at the relationship of the risk of methamphetamine use and HIV seroconversion. So that kind of got me involved in looking at psychosocial behavioral research. I'm a clinical infectious disease epidemiologist, so I'm not, I'm talking about these things where, I'm all about the clinical outcomes, and, things that are very hard measured to doing behavioral work and psychosocial work. And so my methamphetamine paper kind of drove me to work with Ron Stahl and at the time David Ostro. And so we started to work on and Ron and I wrote a grant looking at methamphetamine use and stimulant abuse on health outcomes and co-occurring conditions called syndemics. And we got this grant from NIDA, we wrote all of these papers, and one of the things that we were curious about is the fact that when we looked at the patterns of drug use, stimulant use over the cohort, we saw these people who never used and people that always used, and then we saw these two groups in the middle, and one of them was very curious, was someone starting off with high use and then dropping down to low use. And Ron may have shown this slide early on. We were thinking, well, what is that? Why are men who started using stimulants now not using stimulants? So we thought about what construct is that? How do people do this? And it led us to frame current research that we're doing about resiliencies. So we've all, and I'm complicit, and a lot of people who are doing behavioral and psychosocial work and HIV and gay and bisexual men have been complicit in trying to having written these papers that pathologize sex and pathologize drugs and pathologize gay men. And we know, and it was necessary at the time to understand what was going on for prevention and treatment of HIV. But we've done it. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of papers have been published about this. And, you know, the issue has always been, for me at least, when I think about it, is that, you know, the bottom line is gay men need help. And, you know, what we wanted to try and do, based upon the earlier looking at patterns of stimulant use, is that there are strengths in men in the MACs and strengths in men in the community at wide. Can we uncover that? Can we write about resiliencies? Can we write about strengths as a way to inform things that we might be able to do for men and women who are still vulnerable, to use that word, but are still have issues relating to maintaining good health. So we wrote this grant 4 times. They didn't quite get it at NIH. They couldn't get the thing that, I mean, we weren't talking about deficits and pathology, that we were actually talking about strengths. Because we had this long history of this, and we were trying to get the boat to shift a little bit. So we did finally get this funded, and we are currently in the beginning of the 3rd year of data collection. So one of the things that I'm going to show you today is just a snippet of some early work, very preliminary work on one of the scales, one of the set of questions that we ask, which is the generalized resiliency scale, and an outcome, viral suppression. So this is what this is. Okay. It's just a snippet. The story is going to be widely told after we finish collecting the data. Okay, so the MACs and the Ys run on 6-month semi-annual visits. So our data collection is over 3 years. We have a whole host of questions that we ask the men. Some are recurring across every single visit collection, and some are syncopated, meaning that we collect them a little bit infrequently. We've got the men 40 and above take this survey by paper, tablet, or computer, and because the MACs has an overwhelmingly large reservoir of biologic samples and clinical outcomes and laboratory data, we're able to connect the psychosocial, the behavioral data with actual physical outcomes, which is really what we want to do. Because health is driven by your physicality and how you feel and how well you're doing. And what we want to do is kind of marry the psychosocial, the behavioral things to the physical outcomes. Again, I told you that there are 4 sites: Chicago, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and L.A., and they had to be at least 40 years of age at April 1, 2016, and have had to have reported having sex with men during the course of being in the MACs. So one of the scales, the 14 resiliency scale here, and I don't want to go through this is a well-established, extremely highly validated scale. What that means is that these measurements have actually been compared to physical measurements, physical outcomes, like, for instance, blood pressure. And the relationship between the resiliencies measure, how people score on this, scores very high on that measurement. So that people who are resilient, highly resilient, they're the ones that are controlling their blood pressure level. So you get the point. All right. Strength, good health. So this is one of the many blocks of questions that we ask. So here on the right are all of the questions scales that we ask. So we ask questions because we constructed resiliency. It's not about specific individual traits or characteristics. characteristics, but there are some on the individual level, there are some on the didactic level, there's some on the community level, and some on the structural level. And the diagram on the right side shows all of the scales and all of the questions that we ask across all of those 6 waves of data collection. So for instance, so we asked about housing, internalized homophobia, self-monitoring, volunteer work, whether or not you're retired or unemployed, work status, global resiliency, which is the thing that we're talking about today, orientation test, loneliness, sexual functioning. We've asked some questions about sexual partnerships with trans individuals. We have a whole set of questions about bisexuality, discrimination, religiosity and spirituality, substance use, sex work, the kind of a whole compendium of what we think is the instruction of all of these particular things. So we add all these the responses up for the 14 questions, and here we've got these bars of looking at high, medium, low resiliencies. And as a matter of fact, if you look at these, they're pretty similar between the HIV positive and the HIV negative. And as a matter of fact, when we do statistical testing of the scores between both the positive guys and the negative guys, we don't find any difference. Interestingly enough. We thought we might, we don't. So 64% of the men score high on the resiliency scale, 22.6 on the median range, and 13.3 in the low range. The sample was, the mean age was about 62, was 31.2% racial minority, and most percentages are not here, but it's about 42% have a college degree or greater. Out of this sample, about 47% were positive. And so what we wanted to do is, so what? We've got these medium, high, and low resiliencies. We need to validate this against some sort of physical marker. So one of the aims of this grant was to identify these resiliencies, whatever they may be, and see how they affect viral suppression. So that's our validation. We have the resiliency scores, we have a physical outcome, which is the viral suppression. So we looked at detectable viral load, and we defined that by greater than or equal to 20 copies per ml and using Roche TACMET technique. So the bottom line is here, when we looked at these groups, high, medium, and moderate, and low resiliencies, men with the highest resiliencies were less likely to have a detectable viral load, okay, compared to those who had low resiliencies. And one might say, well, that makes sense. Strength means that you're taking your medication and you're virally suppressed. This is a good thing for validating the scale in this particular population, because this scale had not been validated in gay and bisexual men, and certainly have not been validated in HIV. So just this alone is a remarkable set of findings, because we can add to the literature of another sample where this scale has worked. And again, as I said, we didn't find any differences by HIV status. So that's just, like I said, a snippet of all of the things that we're collecting right now. We've got a lot of questions. I'm particularly interested in characterization. Believe it or not, we have never characterized the relationships of the men and the max over 35 years, other than how many sexual partners. I think it's a little embarrassing that we've never done that, frankly, but I'm going to be openly say that we've not. So, what's your family? What's the structure of your family? Your partner, your sexual partner, your biologic family, your friends. Who are they? And so we're asking a lot of questions, kind of drilling down after 35 years of this cohort being conducted to try and understand the structure and the function of a family. And I use that family term in a very, very, very broad sense. Second thing that I'm interested in is the issue of physical energy, body image, and exercise. Perceptions of exercise, acceptance of exercise, issues of masculinity and muscularity among aging gay and bisexual men, and whether or not there are differences in HIV. So, I think that's my little spiel for today. There'll be other things, when we finish this data collection, I'd be more than happy to come back and tell you about the other things that we found. But we're still in data collection mode. Oh God, one more year, and then we'll be able to start writing a lot of papers. But stay tuned.
Could you go back to that one slide before you showed it down? You had a slide on the questions.
Yes.
I would like to see that again if I may, please.
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is called, if you Google this is the RS-14. And there is, you can find out a lot of information about this because the creator of this scale and a whole host of things about resiliency and what it means and how it's constructed is on a website called the Resilience Center.
The Resilience
Center. So you'll see. Yeah, you're welcome.
We'll have time for Q&A after.
So my name is Sarah Gianella, and I am an investigator at the Center for AIDS Research at UCSD. And we put together the slides with David Moore, and he's also an investigator at the HNRC. And we were given the task to try to summarize aging-related finding and research at UCSD in 10 minutes, which is basically what I can talk over 10 hours. So we really tried to kind of point out the main studies that are ongoing, some example study, because there's many, many more, and we will show a couple of recent findings. And again, like there is much, much more, and we just try to select what we thought might be of interest here. And so what I wanted to point out is that aging in HIV is very complex. From a biological and psychological point of view, there are many different aspects that contribute to aging. For example, antiretroviral therapies and the immune system and HIV replication and other co-infection and microbial transportation. Some of them were mentioned, but again, that's like there is no way that we can cover any of these in this short time. But I always use this nice slide from a Lancet review from Steve Weeks, which kind of does a nice job in summarizing this. But basically touching on one of these aspects, this is a study that our colleague Sanjay Mehta and Ron Ellis just presented at Croy, and Jeff actually asked us specifically to touch on it, not because anybody uses meth, but only because we thought that this might be of interest for people. But basically what they found, they were comparing telomere length, and telomere length is a measure in cells that kind of gives an idea about how many times a cell replicates, because every time a cell replicates, the telomere becomes a little bit shorter, and so it's like in research we often use it as a to see aging, and we know that telomere length is associated with some diseases. And basically, they were looking if HIV and methamphetamine, or HIV and methamphetamine together, had an effect on telomere length. And what I think was very interesting here is basically that HIV and methamphetamine had some effect on telomere length, but using as a being HIV positive and using methamphetamine together had a much bigger effect on telomere length. In fact, HIV and methamphetamine together made your cell look like somebody that was 20 years older than somebody who was HIV infected without methamphetamine. I get the point here that methamphetamine is bad for everybody, but it looks like in the setting of HIV infection, it might be even worse. Like this study, of course, has many limitations. It's a small study and it needs to be confirmed with a bigger study, but that's just something that we wanted to confirm. Another study that we would like, that we wanted to show, it's from Rhiannon Moore, and it was published a couple of years ago. And what she was doing, she was following a subset of people that were older and infected by HIV. And she was asking multiple times a day for over a period of time, where are you, who are you, what are you doing? And basically the majority of people say, I am at home, alone, doing passive activities like navigating the internet or reading. And this kind of was eye-opening for us about what kind of intervention this population might need. And David Moore and Rhiannon and many people at UC San Diego right now have focused their effort a lot in trying to encourage people to do more physical activity and social interaction, because that's very important, and we have some data to support it. So we have some good news. We try to concentrate our little talk about what we can do and what's the good news out there. For example, this study, we showed the effect of positive and active lifestyle factors on neurocognition. So this scale shows neurocognition, and David put words here, better here, just to make sure I remember. That's this one, yeah. He adapted the slides from me because I'm not a medical psychologist. But basically, here you can show that having, like they have these three positive factors, and having 3 out of 3 positive factor was associated with significantly better neurocognition. So having a positive and active lifestyle was associated with better neurocognitive functioning. Interestingly, like here, we are looking at optimism. So this is an older way to look at being positive, like a little bit like resilience. Like it's not the same exact. Everybody knows. So optimism means how do we see our future and how do we see life in general. And here, the cohort was stratified in 3 age groups: 36 to 45, 46 to 65. 56 to 65, and all these participants were followed over 3 years of follow-up. And you can see that over time, optimism stayed the same in the younger people, while the older people seem to become better. So this means that people that are older, living with HIV, and have been living more time with HIV, seems to develop some sort of resilience and optimism, and might be more likely to accept and see the positive part of the disease, which is good news. And this is kind of a little bit of a crowded slide, but basically what you want to take away is that similarly, grit and ambition, so when grit is basically perseverance, ambition is the desire to be successful, both of them were associated in older people with HIV with better everyday function and better neurocognitive functioning. So a lot of positive character and psychological feature associated with better living. And this is important because basically there is right now no golden pill to improve aging in people with HIV, like with or without HIV, but there is a lot of little steps that we all can do to improve our health. And that's true for everybody, that's with or without HIV, but I think it might be particularly important for people with HIV because we know that the aging process might be a little bit accelerated. So what are these steps? Like physical activity and diet. So basic health care, like go to your doctor, make sure you have all your shots, live a healthy lifestyle, cognitive activities, spend more time reading and socializing and networking and integrating, not being stressed, try to develop optimism, resilience, and positive attitude. All of these, which seems obvious, but we all can make a better job and try to address it. And it will, as it's scientifically proven now, it will improve your health and neurocognition. So we have many studies going on at UCSD that address aging. And this is just a couple of example study, but we have many more. And if you are interested in hearing any of these, please, so you can fill out one of our documents, and we will be contacting you, and we can talk with you and see if you are interested in any particular aspects of our study. Like one that we wanted to mention is CNTN, California Neuro AIDS Tissue Network. This is a study that has been going on since 20 years, where we enroll and follow people that are living with HIV and are at increased risk of death, and we follow them with yearly or 6 monthly visit to characterize and collect blood and cerebrospinal fluid if needed, and then the end goal is to collect the body once people die, to harvest tissue and create a biorepository of different tissue that researcher can use to answer many questions about how HIV spreads to the tissue in the brain in particular, and all sorts of questions. And this has been going on since 20 years, extremely successful. More recently, there is a nested study within CNTN, it's called The Last Gift. This last gift has been particularly focused on HIV cure research. So the reason why we needed a last gift is because CNTN follows people every year, and so we do not have a lot of clinical information right before people die, and this is a problem if we want to study the reservoir, because as you might know, people need to be on antiretroviral therapy in order to be able to measure the reservoir, or at least we need to know if they are on or off. And basically the last gift follows people that once they are very closer to the time of death. We follow them much closer, like every week we touch base and we collect blood regularly, and then we do a rapid autopsy. And the rapid autopsy means we basically collect the body and collect tissue within maximum 6 hours from the time of death. And this is the reason why right now we still cannot enroll in Palm Springs, because we need to figure out the logistics. But we are doing it in San Diego. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it because it's the rapid autopsy is a very interesting process that we have developed. It requires 11 people on call 24/7. But it has worked out. It's a nice study because basically all the tissue that you collect, the protein and the nucleic acid is well preserved because this window of 6 hours is necessary. So another study that we thought was important, here is the tesamorelin study, which is enrolling currently actively in Borrego Health. So tesamorelin is a study, so it's an injectable drug that people use to reduce abdominal fat, and it's used routinely for people that need to lose weight, basically. And Ronald Ellis designed this study to see if this drug was also having a positive effect on neurocognition. And so basically, this study is enrolling right now, and it's very popular. I will do it as well. But the idea is by reducing fat, abdominal fat, it will improve neurocognition in people living with HIV. I don't think they have an HIV negative control. And okay, here again, like it's a list of studies. We have like HNRC and TMARC. These are long-term cohorts where we follow people over many years with yearly blood draws. iStep is a study where we look at physical activities with text messages. I almost done. Okay. And but there is many more studies. So basically, Susana Concha Garcia, Cross by Robert are three of our outreach persons. Susana is here downstairs, and you can call this number and you will be referred. But if you want us to call, that's Liz has our documents. So there are many doctors that we need to acknowledge that contributed with slides to this presentation. And if you have any questions for me or David, we are happy to take them.
Thank you.
We've got about 5 minutes for Q&A, so now's your time to ask questions.
I have a question on the neuropathy.
Yes.
Did you find in your research that if you had T cells under 200 for a long period of time, and then after so many years you became undetectable, does the neuropathy decrease at that time, or does it?
As far as once neuropathy develops, I think it's on its own course. I don't think that we can do much about that. But your other thing about the longer you go without, with the low T cell count before you get on treatment, probably increases the risk of developing those side effects.
And to follow up on Ken, we've looked at patterns of change in neuropathy and the max, and once you have it, the only thing that probably changes is the symptomatology of it, meaning the difference between the numbness and the pain, the numbness and the pain, but there's no recovery.
So, Fred, to follow up on that, is there anything new to help with the symptoms of neuropathy?
Well, there are lots of medications out. I must say that I'm not thrilled with them. So no.
Do you see any hope for something new?
We're starting a new study at UCSD. It's not up yet, but it's funded to look at cannabis, actually, and the amount of cannabidiol versus THC and how often it's used to look at peripheral neuropathy.
Is that topical or is it a
No. It's looking at people's natural use, and then we have another one that's looking at tinctures recently. So those are up and to be determined, but if you put your name on the list, we'll let you know what's there.
On his passer and on the clipboard.
That was not a question.
Just got Ken discount every study.
I'm sorry, is it
Tessamorla?
the injectable versus the oral retroviral?
Okay.
Is it going to be like? Is it something that is slow release? Is it an
Yes, it's a slow release, and so that's why it looks like it can be administered either with a monthly injection or every other month, and that's what the study is looking at. Now that's the study by industry, and then obviously we're kind of interested in how that affects inflammation. Aging increases inflammation, HIV increases inflammation. What can we do to reduce it? Lifestyle changes that were discussed in the other presentation are huge. Exercise shows a reduction in biomarkers of inflammation. Going to normal body mass, the same thing. So it's trying to stay trim and exercise a lot is a way to hopefully forestall disease of aging. Yes, sir.
What are the qualifications for that study? You have to be failing current medication?
No, in that particular study, and again, we're not enrolling right now because it's on hold, but basically the qualifications are you can only have been in this, most people will not make it because you can only have been on 2 regimens and can't have failed either one.
Yeah.
Not in this good luck and rolling.
Yeah, so yes, correct.
Yeah.
I was really surprised at the max time after 34 years with the comparison between positive and negative men, that seemingly there wasn't much of a difference in resilience in them. And I guess the only reason I would think is perhaps because of the stress of being positive for 35 years or 30 whatever versus not. But is there any thought about that?
Oh, good question. I don't know. I don't know. I think they're so it's very interesting that the negative guys in the MAC actually have more medical problems than the positive guys, just in general. Okay. And so their diabetes, God, I'm having a brain fart. Their elevated lipids, diabetes, hypertension, elevated lipids. The negative guys have worse prevalence than the positive guys, and I think the reason for that is that the positive guys are going to see their doctors. You know, and depending upon whether or not, and you know what you're doing, and as bad as it is, you know, your doctor goes in and goes over your labs and just goes over your life, and you're doing that self-inventory. You're doing that self-inventory every, 3 or 4 months, and he or she is reminding you of things that are going on based upon the laboratory results and the physical exam. You know, it makes sense to me. So there may, and I'm just, going back to your original question, there may be issues about contact of guys, where you might expect the negative guys to be less resilient than the positive guys. They're equivalent because of the fact that they see their doctors. They have the support. Clinical support is really helpful. Even though you may not like the message, seeing the person and talking to the person is a good thing.
I think we're at time.
Other questions?
So I wanted to make mention of the neuropathy thing. So, I see these ads on for Lyrica. Oh God, frightening. A little bit. And they horrible drugs. Horrible. But the other thing that there was some traction about, probably about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer was that, was acupuncture. But that randomized trial didn't show any difference either. So the cannabis thing seems very, very intriguing to me.
There seem to be tons of ads for chiropractors to help with neuropathy.
I can't comment.
They're in the newspaper all the time.
I would just mention there was one Israeli researcher, because we can't do a lot of cannabis research here, but that he looked at it and found that certain cannabinoids would enhance neurotransmitters, others would block neurotransmitters. Clearly, if we can look at the different cannabinoids, figure out what does what, we could then come up with those kinds of drugs that might help neuropathy. Actually, by using cannabis.
Going to a chiropractor
Well,
helps you with neuropathy.
I don't.
And frankly, I don't know. So the issue with neuropathy is going to be the symptom, improving symptoms. So cannabinoids are not. They're not going to be. It will not improve the functioning of the nerves. Okay, it's going to be a management of the symptoms.
One last question.
I'm sticking to the neuropathy issue. What you're saying is implying that once there's demyelination, that it cannot be restored.
It never gets better.
Yes, that is correct. That's correct. Yes. Sadly.
I have a question. I was thinking like the guy from Penton or America, and I stopped taking it, it was damaging my liver, and I started increasing my magnesium.
Pardon me?
I started increasing my magnesium, and that I'm tolerating it.